From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, how are you today? I'm looking forward to chatting with you, and we have a fine guest that we could welcome back.
Great, Steve. And how are you doing?
Doing well. I'm been getting we're at the beginning of 2025, so I think we're all kind of getting our feet wet into the new year, and looking forward to what's to come. So. Um, We get to welcome back our most frequent visitor to Ask the Programmer and somebody who I've become friends with over the years, and we enjoy speaking with both through this podcast and other means. And he's a great wealth of information and a great journalist. And his name is Dan Ferrisi. He's the group editor for commercial and security with Emerald. Welcome back, Dan.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much, James, for having me. It's always a real pleasure to join you on the podcast. And I know you're getting very close to a milestone, a number of podcasts. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. And I always consider it a real honor to be asked back. So thank you.
Thanks for being with us. And we're fortunate to have Dan. Dan, if you haven't caught some of his past episodes, some of them, the most recent are 181 and 182, but he was also with us in several others. So check those out. And Dan always brings to us an interesting perspective that allows us to, James and I, to really talk a bit about what our thoughts are about questions for Ask the Programmer. So Dan, I'll throw it over to you. And what do you have in store for us today?
Well, thank you again, Steve. One of the things you always give me an opportunity to do, which I really appreciate, is kind of be the voice of our audience. I mean, really, at the helm of Commercial Integrator, I want to be a conduit for integrators. I want to share their thoughts and their concerns, give them best practices, and give them everything that they want to know. But I also want to be a conduit to be able to ask the questions that they might not be able to ask. So I have some questions, and we're going to go with one today, I think. And this is directly from our audience at Commercial Integrator. Do all AV programmers need to know how to code, or can all the other skills that contribute to their success overshadow this need, as long as coding can be outsourced or addressed with a no-code tool? So it ultimately comes down to do all AV programmers need to know how to code? How would you answer that question, Steve, James?
Well, I
I'll,
can get us
I'll let
started.
you go first, Steve. I usually go first. So I'll let you go first this time.
Well, I thought that I have, and I think we should go back and forth because there's probably many ways that we can slice this one, but y- there is so much that goes into the success of a programmer, and James and I have talked about this on a past episode where we were um, talking about what is the percentage of time that you actually spend writing code within a programmer's day or within a project, and it's really not as much as people think. And this is something that I've tried to explain to some clients when we've worked on programming projects that you're writing, you think you're paying for us to actually provide code to make a system operate, and that's the deliverable, but it's the knowledge and the expertise that we bring to the table in addition to the ability to steer clients in the right direction, to provide experience from past projects, to also do the implementation, the commissioning, the troubleshooting, the maintenance. There's a lot of different aspects. So if we take out the idea that perhaps a programmer doesn't need to write code, two ways that we could apply that. One would be if there were different tools that could do the code writing for you, which is something that might be considered. And the second part is can we get to a place where a programmer would be able to draft enough of a scope that detailed how specifically the system should work, and could that be their deliverable, and then writing the code can be done maybe outsourced or to a country that is very plentiful in coders, or that which happens quite often in with companies in the US, or just have some other way of generating the code that because really the magic comes in what the code in crafting and architecting the code, not necessarily actually creating it.
What Steve said, and as he mentioned, we have talked about this and the skill set and the amount of coding is minimal compared to everything else. But I want to attack this almost head on. And if I understand what the user or the question, the person asking the question is asking is, does an AV programmer need to know how to program? I want to answer this directly saying, if you don't know how to program, are you an AV programmer? It doesn't mean your skills are set. Like you can still know how to design a system, troubleshoot, all that stuff. But if you don't know how to program, I don't think you should be labeled as the AV programmer. I mean, that might be what the company labels you at, but let's look at that. Like if your job description is an AV programmer and you're supposed to be programming systems and you don't know how to program AV, how are you going to be successful in that job? So it might require a title change, or job description change. So going to the question is, if you're going to call someone an AV programmer, I feel they need to know how to program. Doesn't mean they are actually writing a lot of code. Doesn't mean spending 90% of their time coding, but it means that they can actually code. And I'm sure Steve's like this, and he may even not realize he does this, but I know I do this with when I'm talking to a client or I'm talking about a system and going through things is in the back of my mind, I'm already seeing how I'm writing the code. So even though I'm not actually writing code at that time, my time spent is not writing code. I'm seeing how that user request is fitting within the scope to be programmed. Like, oh, can I program this aspect? Can I achieve what the user want with code? Or do I not have that skill set and I need to go learn? Like, I'm already working on that all in the back of my mind when I'm having those conversations. So again, to answer the question directly, I think if you're going to call yourself an AV programmer or your company is going to use the title as AV programmer, the skill set should have that you can program.
Just to pick up on some of what you both said, I'm kind of curious. You mentioned like outsourcing options, Steve. Is that something that is widespread where, programming companies or, firms like yours or anybody else, is that something that's widely deployed, like outsourced or contract coding, or is that something that's kind of just building up?
So there's a lot of different. uh, we're trying new things. I'll start there, and it's actually something that we've been encouraged to consider because as we've gotten out of the proprietary world, and as we've been able to have the opportunity to write in languages that are done by people outside of our industry, it opens a door to a lot of talent, and it may those people may not actually know what we do and how we do it, but if we could um, tee it up for them to be able to describe specifically what we want and how we want it, there's a lot of um, resources that would allow us to get projects done in that regard. Um, we I rarely talk about the specifics of my company, but one of the things that we're looking at is how do we bring in subcontractors that would allow us to get projects done or supplement our talent or knowledge in certain areas, and that would speak to something like that. So if we could break a project up into a part and say, hey, we need you to do this for us, and this is the way we want you to do it, we the programmer would then be looked at as the architect. They would have to ensure that what they're getting meets their expectations and is done in the way that they are specifying. But that's a an opportunity for expansion.
Eh, So I'll come at this more from the higher ed phase, and I want to say it's depending on situations. Um, in my network of higher ed folks, I know some who rely solely on outsourcing, because they don't have the resources in-house. There's others who are completely in-house. They have the team, the resources, and you also have the mixed bag of some like, okay, we can handle these, but when it gets bigger or unique, we need to outsource. So each situation is a little different. I'm actually came from a university where we did 99% in-house. And now I'm at a spot where we outsource, because I don't have the time or the talent on my team yet to handle the programming that we need done. Um, each has their pros and cons. I will fully admit, from being on both scales, I see the pros and the cons. The pros of, outsourcing is that is a resource you don't need to tie up. Most higher ed teams are slim. To dedicate a one member of your team to be an AB programmer, they are losing out on, you lose out that ability to use them on other tasks like installation, troubleshooting, all that. So they're focusing on programming. If you have a large enough team, that's great, but a lot of higher ed don't have that. That's a pro of outsourcing. A ton of outsourcing is you are at the mercy of the outsource sometimes. Like I know the times I've outsourced code, both where I was doing most of the code myself, and here is when there's an issue, I gotta reach out to the programmer. I gotta find out the time that they're available to come look at it. It's not like, okay, I'm pulling up the code, rewriting the code, and fixing it within that moment. Is I gotta get on someone else's schedule and their resources and their time commitment. And then there's also a disconnect sometimes the user. I had this conversation with a third party programmer, integrator program back my old job, where the integrator company was doing the installation, but they were told they were using my code. So I wrote the code and I sent it to them so they can, test everything with their shop and all this stuff. And I got a call from their programmer and they're like, this doesn't make sense of how you're doing this. And the option was that when we switch video sources to the display, the room display, the local preview follows. So, you have the room PC, you have the laptop, you have the docket camera. And their programmer is like, well, you don't need to send it to the local display because if you're using a laptop, you got the laptop in front of you already. If you use the dock cam, you got that in front of you already. And I said, I understand that. And they're like, yeah, we never program any of our spaces like this. I'm like, I understand that. I go, we tried that. Our users flipped out saying the system wasn't working because it wasn't on the local preview. He's like, but that doesn't make sense. I'm like, I don't disagree with you, but our users want it on the local monitor or they say it doesn't work. So we need it this way. This is how our users use the system. We're different than some other people.
Interesting stuff. Yeah. I don't know. Is there time for another question, Steve, or do we need to move on?
I think, well, if there's a follow-up question, absolutely. But if we're going to switch gears, we'll hold that to the next episode.
Yeah, just one other follow-up question, and it,
Sure.
it goes to you, James. You kind of said, can you really call yourself a programmer if you're not familiar with programming? I'm just kind of curious, and I know both of you have hiring responsibility to some extent, overseeing your teams. When you're hiring people, whether it's for programming or anything else, how important is it for you to have kind of that foundational knowledge versus someone who you see other soft skills in or other intangibles, and you say, I can upskill you in the technical stuff, but you have the intangibles that it's really hard to find. If you could just kind of give me a quick hit on that, because I know you both are responsible for hiring. How important is the technical nitty gritty versus he or she has the soft skills, and I can build the tech on top of that? I can build it on top of that.
So that's a great question, Dan. And I'll go back to the comment I made during one of the episodes that we had you on where we were talking about the conference, and I said, tech is easy, people are hard. Um, so yes, I can teach people tech. Um, Having those soft skills are very vital. I think that's a little more important than the tech because anybody given the time and the knowledge can learn how to do tech. They can learn how to solder, they can learn how to run cables, they can learn how the right code, whatever. But having a financial information coming in, I think is vital as well because it allows them to get up to speed quicker. So if you take someone, say, and I'm just going to use a wild example, you bring someone from the automotive company who's a car mechanic, they know how to work on engine, and you're going to expect them to be an AV programmer. You that time commitment to get them that training to get them up to speed is going to be more than say taking someone who was an installer in AV and training them to learn programming. So it's really that time commitment that you need. So if someone already has some basic knowledge, or even taking someone from the IT software development who has a idea of how to put programs together, can jump in quicker than taking someone who has zero knowledge about any kind of language programming.
I'll kind of address it very briefly because I think James did a great job with it, and there's always going to be a need for the soft skills, but it depends on the role that you're trying to fill. So if you have somebody who is coming up from more of an entry level, and you know that you're going to shape them and invest in them, and you know that they need to be trained, then having more of a complete package is important. But if there's somebody who is really good at what they do and they don't have some of those soft skills, I think that if you really need the skills that they bring, then they could still be very valuable. You just have to know how to use them effectively. But it really does. I think that the more advanced positions, the more advanced you are technically, the more that can be favored. However, you have to understand that it may limit you, ultimately down the road.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both James and Steve, for giving us such great insight for our audience's question. I look forward to joining you again soon on another episode.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for being with us. It's always a pleasure to have you, and you always bring some new ideas and some really great conversation to our show. How could people get in touch with you, learn more about your work with Emerald, and also share some thoughts and ideas for future conversation?
Well, again, thank you so much for having me. You can always find me at commercialintegrator.com or at securitysales.com, the two brands I oversee. You can email me at dan.ferrisi@emeraldx.com. You also find me on LinkedIn. I tend to be very active on LinkedIn. I also have created a Blue Sky presence in the last few weeks, so find me on Blue Sky.
Wonderful. I we like seeing you in all those places, so that's great, and nothing beats in person. Um, James, how could people get in touch with you, continue this conversation, and learn what you're up to?
Again, you Google me, you'll find me. I'm out there. I'm always running around somewhere, either with the higher ed folks, HEPMA, on Blue Sky, on Twitter, in the LinkedIn, Ask the Program community. Again, Google me, you'll find me.
Wonderful. And for me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. My company, Control Concepts, is a supporter of this show. And what we do is we help programmers by developing the building blocks that they need to get their projects done and be successful, whether it's integrating products or adding new functionality to systems. Those those items can be found at controlconcepts.net. And as James said, please connect with us on LinkedIn and join our LinkedIn group, Ask the Programmer. That's where we want to be able to plant the seeds to build a community of programmers to both continue to discuss these topics that are important, and but also to engage with each other and help each other to be more successful. And until next time, this has been Ask the Programmer.